the U.S. has provided Israel with billions of dollars worth of military aid since October 7th. So there was a question of, does this paused weapon shipment actually prevent them from going into Rafah? And the answer is, if you ask the Israelis, is no. The IDF said even earlier today that they have all the weapons they need for the operations they want to conduct in Rafah. Now, part of the telling part of that statement from the Israelis is the operations they want to conduct. And so it's not exactly clear if they will go ahead with the full-scale military invasion that they have talked about for months now, given President Biden's public warning.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, obviously the big hubbub has been President Biden's position on the Israeli offensive. Not yet hasn't happened at this time we're taping, but the proposed offensive in Rafah. Talk us through a little bit about what the controversy is.
So at this exact moment, Israel has begun sort of low-intensity operations in some parts of Rafah. And so you and I have talked for months now about Israel's intention to go into Rafah and the U.S.'s continued objections to them doing just that. And so from the U.S. perspective, more than 1 million Palestinians have fled south during the war, leaving behind what has now become a lot of rubble. And so there isn't a lot of places in Gaza for Israel to essentially evacuate that population, because this is the last remaining area that Israel hasn't conducted full-scale operations. The U.S. And several other Western governments and international organizations have warned that if Israel conducted a full-scale invasion of Rafah without properly accounting for such a large civilian population, there could be untold numbers of civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. Now, this week, we've seen President Biden publicly take a step that was not very shocking, but he said that the U.S. would not continue to supply Israel with offensive military weapons if they do in fact go into Rafah completely. And so there's been a lot that has built up to this moment, but it's not exactly a surprise considering the U.S. has publicly expressed its opposition to such a decision for months now. And so this, while it has been months in the making, is the first time we've seen President Biden take this step. And it also comes on the heels, which we found out a couple days ago, that they withheld or essentially paused a supply of bombs from the U.S. to Israel. And so there was an aid package that was paused last week that consists of about 3,500 bombs that the U.S. Has provided to Israel in the past, but they decided to hold these right now, pending further review, because they're worried about the damage that these bombs could have if they were deployed in such a densely populated area like Rafah.
So there's been a lot of backlash against this, both the fact that there's been aid that's already been delayed and the fact that Biden has taken this position so publicly.
Absolutely. And so there are members of both sides of the aisle who have expressed both support and condemnation from the president. There are those who believe Israel or the U.S. is abandoning its ally, and there are those that believe President Biden is doing what he should have done a long time ago in conditioning military support for Israel in exchange for essentially Israel doing what the U.S. wants, which in fact is not going into Rafah, which poses a threat to the more than 1 million Palestinian civilians who are in that city right now.
Obviously, this means that this really makes clear what Biden's public position is, and maybe they've had some of these conversations in private, and now it's really out there in public. But there's some question about how much they actually need additional weapons and whether Israel could already conduct this offensive with what they already have.
That's exactly right. So the U.S. has provided Israel with billions of dollars worth of military aid since October 7th. So there was a question of, does this paused weapon shipment actually prevent them from going into Rafah? And the answer is, if you ask the Israelis, is no. The IDF said even earlier today that they have all the weapons they need for the operations they want to conduct in Rafah. Now, part of the telling part of that statement from the Israelis is the operations they want to conduct. And so it's not exactly clear if they will go ahead with the full-scale military invasion that they have talked about for months now, given President Biden's public warning. Now, the U.S. has said they wouldn't support this type of operation for a long time now, but it was another step or another pivotal moment for President Biden to go on the record and say, if they go into Rafah in a way they haven't yet, that
there would be consequences.
That there would be consequences as it relates to future aid.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.